Hello, I'm Jackie Leonard, and this is the Happy Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. In this edition, we will be bringing you a selection of the most inspiring, uplifting and joyful stories of 2018. We have a tale of courage, selflessness and the triumph of team spirit from Thailand. You remember the one. Medical breakthroughs that could have positive and far-reaching effects in the treatment of paralysis and blindness. And an extraordinary year for one of the world's most extraordinary sporting stars. Also in this podcast, 2 weddings. Don't roll your eyes, we like weddings. Life-saving technology, the importance of good neighbours.
Oh gosh, love their neighbour. Look, life is short and you need people around you you can rely on. It's not good enough to ignore people.
And a daredevil raccoon. We begin with a story that gripped the world. The Wild Boars, a boys' football team in Thailand who went into a cave complex with their coach on June the 23rd and became trapped in the darkness when heavy rains caused the caves to flood. A massive international rescue effort followed as the world anxiously watched, and the last of the group was safely brought out 2.5 weeks later on July the 10th. It was a tale of courage, dedication, expertise and international cooperation. And Howard Johnson was there to cover it for us.
This was a very complex rescue operation. The fact that the boys had not been seen or heard of since the day they went missing, a few footprints in the mud in the entrance to the cave was all they had to go on. Lots of people assumed, given that these caves are very dangerous around this time of year, that the chances of them being found alive were very slim. This was really, some people assumed it was a recovery operation. But the teams that arrived, they were galvanized, I think, particularly by the British experts, the divers, who I met on the first day. They were very stony-faced as they walked out of the cave. They wouldn't reveal what they'd seen. People told me subsequently that when you do cave diving, it's a very intense experience.
And after 9 days, this happened.
Hello, thank you.
How many of you? 13?
Yeah, 13.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We are coming. It's okay. It's okay. Many people are coming. We are the first. Many people come.
What day? What
Tomorrow. No. What day is it? They're asking. Monday. Okay, but 1 week and Monday. You have been here 10 days.
That still sends shivers down the back of my neck, I have to say. Extraordinary good news. What was reaction outside the cave complex when you heard about that?
That news broke around 10 o'clock on the Sunday evening.
ปรากฏว่าหาดพัทยาโดนน้ำท่วมก็เลยลึกเข้าไปอีกประมาณ 3-400 เมตรเป็นที่สูงอีกจุดนึงเราพบน้องทั้ง 13 คนปลอดภัย
And I had just gone to bed, but suddenly I got a phone call from my colleagues. You need to get out of bed. You know, they found the boys. And I raced out of my room, and what I saw around that time was lots of people in the hotel lobby celebrating. There were whoops and cheers. There was a lot of optimism. But then they started to realize the scale of the task, getting the boys out of the cave complex. Then the next day was slightly more sobering, looking at the details of how they could try to get these 13 children and their coach out of the cave complex alive.
You're right, it was an absolute emotional roller coaster. I was working in the newsroom when that news came through. And yes, there were whoops, there was euphoria. And in our naivety, perhaps, we kind of assumed that once the boys had been located, that was the difficult bit over with. But we were very wrong.
Yes, this was really a truly global story that the whole world cared about. But the details started to emerge about how difficult it would be to get the boys out, the twists and turns of the cave complex, the very narrow parts that they would have to try to navigate the boys through. The word was that most of them couldn't swim. Divers said that they couldn't see much further than their hand in front of them. The visibility was so bad in the cave that it was like diving blind. So this idea that the children would then have to swim through it became this big question mark. How will they get them out?
There was a point when we thought that the boys might have to stay in the cave for weeks, months even, before they could be safely brought out. But the weather conditions changed.
Yes, in the days building up to D-Day, which was the day where they eventually began this rescue operation, the line was that they would potentially stay in the cave for up to 4 months to sit out the monsoon season. There was talk of getting in stocks and supplies into the cave, but the British divers said that it would be impossible to get in all these supplies because the flood water was rising. So around the time when they made the decision to get the boys out, the rains had started to pick up again. So the decision was made to get them out, and that's when this D-Day operation began.
And just to underline the expertise and the courage of the people who were trying to get these boys out, there was a tragedy when Petty Officer Saman Gunan died.
Yes, Saman Gunan was a former Navy SEAL diver, but he'd come back to help the rescue operation. On the evening when he sadly lost his life, he was ferrying air tanks to the teams that were pushing ahead to get to the boys, and sadly he became unconscious and died in the cave complex, and that caused a lot of sadness in the camp the next day. I remember a lot of offerings that we later saw to honor the memory of this hero who had died trying to find the boys.
In the meantime, obviously it became more and more pressing to get these boys out of the cave complex. How in the end did they manage to do that?
So there was an Australian anaesthetist diver who'd come along to help the guys, and he was actually on holiday at the time when he got the call to come and help the team. And he helped to look at this new unprecedented way of getting the boys and their coach out of the cave, which was by sedating them. And they were given a cocktail of drugs which put them under. Many of the children couldn't swim, so the idea was that by sedating them and putting on a full face oxygen mask, that they would be able to be simply dragged through the cave complex by this expert team of divers.
Because presumably if you couldn't swim and you were in this extreme situation, you might panic.
That's exactly the point. So the idea was that if you could sedate them, put a full face mask on them, and then put them in what was called the shopping bag, in an apparatus that could help just drag them through. I mean, one of the divers said that the children were banging against the rocks, and he was worried, obviously, that the face mask might slip, and if there was a breach on the seal, then that could potentially mean that the boy's life or the coach's life could be lost in the process. So it was really a high-risk operation. It was unprecedented. It had never been done before, and it really is an absolute amazing feat that they got everybody out alive.
So now it's a few months now since they got out. How are they now? What have they been doing since?
The boys are now global celebrities. They've been traveling all around the world. They've just been in Argentina for the Youth Olympic Games. After that, they moved on to the USA, where they went to LA to be on the Ellen show. She introduced them to the famous Swedish football player Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And he went onto the set, gave the boys hugs, and then invited them along to train with the LA Galaxy. We've also seen them invited to Manchester United Football Club. And everywhere they go, they're offered merchandise of the clubs, and they look actually genuinely very happy, and they seem to be enjoying this newfound fame as a result of this terrible ordeal.
You're an international correspondent, Howard. You go all over the world doing quite intense, difficult stories. How did this story strike you? What was the impact of this story on you?
This is without a doubt the most positive story I've ever covered, and most heartwarming. I've only really been a news correspondent for the last 2 years. This was my first major story where I was right in the heart of a story that everybody cared about. But what was most interesting was the atmosphere inside the camp, or the area outside the Tham Luang cave complex. What started as this muddy field eventually became almost like a rock festival. There were people handing out pad thai. By the end, there was espresso coffee. There were back massages being offered. And this only could really come about when the boys had been discovered, this positive, overwhelming positive vibe. And what was lovely about the story, there was hope, and that hope really went around the camp. And it was almost like everybody helped to push each other on to discover the boys and to get them out safely.
That was Howard Johnson. Now to our first happy podcast wedding story. In May this year, the American actress Meghan Markle joined the British royal family when she married Prince Harry in Windsor. It was a ceremony which combined tradition with modernity and embraced not just the usual British pageantry, but also reflected the bride's heritage as a mixed-race American. An American Episcopal bishop, Michael Curry, gave an impassioned address, the likes of which had definitely not been heard at a royal wedding before, quoting the US civil rights leader Martin Luther King, and a black gospel choir sang "Stand By Me." It was all watched by millions of people around the world, and here are some of the highlights.
And the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we see.
The late Dr. Martin Luther King once said, and I quote, "We must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love. And when we do that, we will make of this old world a new world. For love is the only way."
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health. To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
They have declared their marriage by the joining of hands and by the giving and receiving of rings. I therefore proclaim that they are husband and wife.
We saw Harry and William before the service just walk straight past us. They waved at us and we got to say hello to them.
I saw Prince Harry at the start. He said good luck. I said more good luck to you.
You could hear the crowd outside, when they said I will, and the crowd went and we all laughed inside. So there was really, really nice moments like that.
If humanity ever captures the energy of love, it will be the second time in history that we have discovered fire.
Will you, the families and friends of Harry and Meghan, support and uphold them in their marriage now and in the years to come?
And Harry and Meghan, now officially the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, are expecting their first baby in the spring. There will be another wedding story along later in this podcast. No more royalty, though. Simone Biles is a 21-year-old American gymnast for whom the phrase greatest of all time sometimes feels inadequate. She is a person to whom the normal laws of gravity don't seem to apply, and she has wrapped up a remarkable year. But as Sports World's Sarah Mulcairns explained, it didn't get off to a very promising start.
It's her smile, it's how high she leaps, it's her energy, it's the positivity that she brings to her performances in the gymnastics realm. But we do know that she has come through an awful lot. She was such a phenomenal athlete at the 2016 Rio Olympics, where she won 4 gold medals and a bronze. She took time out of the sport after that. She took 18 months out. She was dealing with an awful lot of stuff. One of the things that came out was that she was one of the hundreds of victims from Dr. Larry Nassar, who had abused a significant amount of gymnasts over the course of their careers. She was the one that came forward as one of the victims amongst that. She took time out. She's come back to the sport though, and she came back in phenomenal condition. And when you think 18 months out as a gymnast, what that might do to your body, how far you might have fallen behind, she almost went further ahead than the rest of her competition. She competed at the World Championships in Doha. She was in hospital the day before it started with a kidney stone, and then she took to the floor. She has racked up now a phenomenal 14 gold medals at World Championships, and she was beating her competitors by such large amounts of a margin of victory that she could have fallen a couple of times and still won the gold medals in the events that she did.
And she's absolutely in a class of her own, isn't she?
Yeah, she really is. And, you know, the thing about gymnastics is you have the technical scores, but then you also have the artistic scores. And I remember being in Rio when she was performing and competing. Nobody reacts the same to all of the other competitors than they do to when Simone is on the floor or on the vault. People root for her and people want to connect with her. She has this charisma that goes along with the fact of how brilliant she is as a gymnast technically.
The height is absolutely extraordinary.
It's just amazing, isn't it?
So 2018, definitely Simone Biles' year. What were your other highlights this year?
Jackie, I wonder what you were doing at 17. This
Nothing
is a question.
good.
Yeah, it's a question we always ask. You know, when you think back and you see all these youngsters breaking out in the world of sport, being brilliant, and you just realise that I personally was slobbing around at 17, but Jakob Ingebrigtsen was definitely not slobbing about. He took the athletics world by storm this summer when he was at the European Championships. Basically, he became the youngest ever European champion. He's trained by his father. His older brothers are also athletes, and he won gold in the 1500 metres. That was ahead of his older brothers in 4th and 12th. And then a day later, he won a second gold medal in the 5000 metres event. And thankfully for family relations, Henrik finished second. The Women's World Cup is going to be next year, so we've had an awful lot of qualifying for the teams around the world this year. And I'm just going to mention Jamaica and South Africa and the scenes that were around their qualifications. They've never been to the World Cup before, and both of them have qualified over the last couple of months. And you just see what it means to the players afterwards to think that they finally made the biggest stage. So that was brilliant. And from Jakob, then the youngster, to Angela Stanford, who is an American golfer. And she was 18 years a professional golfer, playing week in, week out on the tour. And then at the age of 40, back in September, she won her first major title. She won the Evian Championship. And it was just brilliant to see, you know, the tears of joy roll down her face as she called her mum, who was back home in America, who's dealing with cancer, and she finally, you know, got to tell her she was a major champion. She was able to celebrate.
That was Sarah Mulcairns, and while we're at it, congratulations to Ada Hegerberg of Norway and Lyon, who won the first women's Ballon d'Or. Now, among the many new things I learnt this year was the phrase trash panda. Thank you for that, North American listeners. This was, of course, the internet sensation known as the NPR raccoon. Back in June, it got stuck on a skyscraper in Minnesota and became the star of meme, fan art, and even music.
Yeah. Oh, raccoon climber, keep on climbing. We need someone to believe in today.
Raccoon Climber by Mark Mallman there. Thank you for letting us use that, Mark. Well, Vanessa Heaney followed the tale.
The drama began on Monday when a raccoon was spotted resting on a ledge in downtown St Paul. Attempts to capture it failed, and then the creature began to climb. Crowds watched, transfixed, as the little furry animal scaled the skyscraper like Spider-Man. It wasn't long before social media was buzzing with images of the climb. One local public radio station named it NPR Raccoon, and the hashtag began trending on Twitter. The city was gripped. The internet was gripped. Local media began live streaming the ascent, calling it Raccoon Watch. But what to do? Anxious raccoon watchers appealed to the local fire department to help, but it was deemed too risky to send a human to save it. So instead, a team set up live traps on the roof of the tower. And then NPR Raccoon stopped climbing and rested on a window ledge of a law firm on the 23rd floor. Office workers watched as the furry animal stretched, scratched and napped. Had it run out of steam? How would it get down? The world looked on anxiously. There were only 2 floors left to climb. And then, in the early hours of Wednesday morning, the building authorities began to live tweet the rescue. MPR Raccoon had finally climbed all 25 floors up to the roof and had been lured into a cage by cat food. The internet let out a collective sigh of relief, and one Twitter user summed up the mood. The greatest story ever told. He made it.
It turns out he was a she, and she was last seen being released into the wild somewhere green and lush with no tall buildings. Still to come in our Happy Global News podcast, the lengths a group of doctors here in the UK were prepared to go to reassure the parents of small children who like brightly coloured plastic building blocks. You know the ones. Now to medical news of 2018. There were some very impressive developments in quite a lot of fields, from stem cell treatment, cancer treatment, transplantation and indeed paralysis. James Gallagher is our health and science correspondent.
This is the time of year that I really like doing my job, because I get to look back and go, look at all the happy stories I've done. And I talk to other correspondents, and they look back at all the bleak, miserable stories they've done. So it's a really nice time for me. So paralysis, it happens when you have an injury, say a sporting injury, or you're in a car accident and it damages the spinal cord. And what that does is it stops the instructions that come from your brain travelling down the spinal cord to the rest of the body. So everything below the injury, say in your legs, you lose control of them. That's what paralysis is. Now, medicine has been trying for a long time to reverse that. Can you regain control of legs and arms after paralysis? And there have been 2 major breakthroughs this year. Both, one team in Switzerland, one team in the United States, have used spinal implants, and they basically put electrodes into the spine to help those lost messages from the brain cross over the injury and get to the legs and regain control.
And let's hear from David MZ, one of the men in the Swiss study. He had been told he would never be able to walk again. Now he can walk nearly 1 kilometre.
So that's a feeling I didn't have it for so many years, and now getting back to that is really fantastic. I remember we had some training, suddenly it was like walking hands-free, just a few steps, like, ooh, that feels really cool. I'm surprised over and over again when we really get there, and it's a lot of fun and it feels very good.
Now, in the Swiss example, rather remarkably, they found evidence of the nerves starting to regrow inside the spinal cord, hints that in the long term, they might not need the implant at all. That still needs to be tested, but that's the potential implication of that. And in the United States, they've gone to this remarkable stage where they're now taking the devices home. It's only in a couple of patients, but they've taken the device home. So they have a remote control, they switch it on, their paralysis is reversed, they get out of bed and go to the bathroom and brush their teeth. What needs to happen now with these things is testing it in one more patients, but also working out what is exactly the best way for getting the best results in the most people, because it's not just put in an implant and click your fingers and everyone's walking again. You also have to combine that with the right rehabilitation programs, the right physiotherapy, and bring all those things together. There's still so many answered questions, but from a field that had nothing to a field that has the hint of something is wow.
So what else has happened in the medical and scientific field in 2018 that has excited you?
Oh, crikey. Everything's excited me. You know that. I think I was very happy this year to see the Nobel Prize for Medicine going to scientists that pioneered immunotherapy in cancer. So it's been this completely new field of medicine. So we've always had radiotherapy and surgery and chemotherapy, or at least in my time, we've always had those. But they've added the 4th pillar of treatment now, immunotherapy. And that's all about harnessing the power of the immune system to basically fight your cancer. And we've seen some cases of patients with terminal disease who basically medicine had nothing that would work for them go into complete remission using immunotherapy. So for some patients, it's been incredibly powerful. And unlike the paralysis story, this is now, routine medicine being used all around the world now. So it has actually transformed the way patients are being cared for.
And stem cell therapy, there have been some quite important breakthroughs there too, haven't there?
Yeah, there was this really cool, and it took place here in London at the University College London, and it was about treating age-related macular degeneration, which is one of the most common forms of blindness. And what happens is, well, your macula is the bit in the middle of your retina, at the back of the eye, and it's the bit that really allows you to see everything in any detail, rather than your peripheral vision. But what happens is there's a layer of cells which nourish the macula that allow you to see, but eventually they die off in macular degeneration. And if you don't support the retina, then that starts to die off too. So the technique was to use stem cells, train them to become this new supportive, nourishing layer, and they grew them so they were 1 cell thick. That is properly tiny. That's microns thick and about 6 millimeters long. And then in what must be some of the most delicate surgery you can imagine, surgeons in London went into the back of these patients' eye to place this underneath the retina to replace that layer of nourishing cells. Did it work? Well, one of the patients was completely blind in his right eye. Now he can read a newspaper. I'd say that worked for that one patient. Again, it's in a small number of people, but it shows you where medicine is going.
And there has also been some quite extraordinary transplant news.
Yes, this is the womb transplant that took place in Brazil. Now, there have been a couple of womb transplants before, but what was really significant about this one was that the donor had died. Now, medicine had thought that this wasn't possible because it had been tried in the past and it had always failed. Either the womb was rejected by the patient or they had a successful pregnancy initially but then miscarried quite early. So people worried it wasn't going to work. But the team in Brazil have managed to make it work. It took a while. They had to be very careful. They had to make sure it was safe to implant an embryo into there, which they made through IVF. But it worked. A year later, a happy baby, seems perfectly healthy. Happy ending story.
That was James Gallagher. Time for another wedding now. This one wasn't in a castle. This one was at 12,000 metres. Yes, 2018 was the year when Pope Francis became the first pontiff to marry a couple mid-air. He was on an internal flight in Chile during his tour of South America in January. The happy couple were flight attendants Paula Podest Ruiz and Carlos Quifardi Eloriga.
Oh, it was so emotional. We're very, very happy.
Being married by a pope on board of a flight is something priceless. I have asked him, do you marry people? He said, yes, from time to time. I have married 40 couples, but never has a pope married somebody on a flight.
The journalist Ines San Martin was also on the plane at the time, and she spoke to Valerie Sanderson.
These are two people who've been civilly married for 8 years. They were supposed to get married on February 2010, but a few days before their wedding, on February 27, a massive earthquake destroyed half of Chile, in their words, including their church, so they were never able to be married. Today, Pope Francis said, well, I'm getting you to marry.
And how did they react? Was this just spontaneous when he heard their story?
Yeah, it was very, very spontaneous, both from the Pope and from them. And their reaction was like, Holy Father, are you sure? And what the Pope jokingly told them is like, are you guys sure about wanting to get married? Of course, they said yes, they were. So it was all very quickly, for what they told us, the Pope asked one of the cardinals traveling with him to write up a marriage license by hand on a normal white piece of paper. It was signed by the Pope, the two people, of course, who got married, and the CEO of LATAM Airlines, who is the one who was actually the witness to this wedding.
So is this a first, a Pope marrying two people on an airplane?
Yes, it is. And of course, it had to come from Pope Francis, who's often dubbed the Pope of First. We're talking about the first Pope of Latin America, the first Pope to do many, many things.
Journalist Ines San Martin. Now, if this story doesn't warm the cockles of your heart, I will have to assume that your heart cockles are deficient. This is the story of Ken, who died recently, and the lovely surprise he left behind for his neighbour's little daughter. It was delivered to the girl's dad, Owen Williams, by Ken's daughter, Jenny. Here's Owen.
Jenny was clutching this large plastic refuse sack. She said, "These are the gifts my father put away for Caddy, your daughter, for the next few years." And she said, it's quite heavy. Sorry, I'm choking up. I said, well, thank you, Jenny. And she said, I'm just going to leave them with you. And she started to tear up. And I thought, oh, goodness me. And I said, God bless. And off she went. And I came back in, and my wife, Caroline, was on FaceTime with her mum in Ireland. And her mum started to tear up on FaceTime. And then we opened up, and I counted 13, but there were actually 14 gifts all wrapped, ranging from, obviously, there are 5 or 6 obvious books here, but there are soft toys, and there's something that sounds like some kind of construction toy. I genuinely don't know I have no idea what these presents are. There's presents here for the next 14 years. She's 2. They take her up to when she's 16. Now, whether or not Ken planned that, I've no idea. But there's something quite charming about taking her up to her teenage years. That way, Ken lives large in her memory, even though she, will never quite remember him, I imagine, because... Sorry, I'm tearing up again now. This is really touching, and I just thought I should share it with people. And it's gone I mean, what's the word, viral? It's gone viral quite quickly, hasn't it? Which is staggering. There are people from all over the world passing comment. But what's really struck me, are messages I've received from people who are saying, that's so lovely, I don't even know my neighbours.
We're all feeling the emotion, Owen. We're all feeling it. Tell us a little bit about Ken.
So Ken was a really interesting character. You know, he'd once been a salvage diver. He'd been a baker, had worked in the family bakery and baked his own wedding cake. He was just a real character. Put it this way, the first time I met him, this is the adventurous spirit. Not only was he doing a wing walk on a biplane this time last year, but he'd wanted to live to do his 100th, so he could do it again his 100th birthday. This is the character we were talking about. He'd given my daughter this large tiger, and we popped into the local toy shop, and we spoke to the lady in the toy shop. We got talking, and we saw one of these Elvises in the corner in the window, and I said, "Oh, my daughter has one of those." She our neighbour brought her one, and she said, "Is it an elderly gentleman with glasses, lives up near Romley Park?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Yeah, he's bought all of them. He bought all of them for every child in the street."
And just finally, you mentioned that Ken was very much part of the community, and a lot of people have commented that they don't talk to their neighbours. Do you have a Christmassy message for people?
Oh, gosh, love their neighbour. Look, life is short and you need people around you can rely on. And whether that's friends or family or your neighbours, it's not good enough to ignore people. Take a bottle of wine and say hi. There's no downside to it.
You heard him. That was Owen Williams on Ken, his remarkable neighbour. There is more to come, but first, here is Charlotte Gallagher with a roundup of some of the other stories that deserve a mention this year.
In Queensland, Australia, the Multicultural Communities Council Gold Coast, in partnership with the Red Cross, launched a free service called I Speak Your Language to ensure that elderly immigrants who might be feeling lonely or isolated get a regular, friendly phone call in their first language. Everyone who has a dog will tell you that their canine friend can read their moods. But it turns out that goats are pretty perceptive too. They can tell the difference between happy and grumpy faces and much prefer the former. Well, who doesn't? The study was published in the Royal Society Open Science. Natalia Albuquerque is one of the authors.
What we found is they not only can distinguish between the two human facial expressions, but they also seem to prefer the positive ones. Doing research about animal behavior and cognition and animal psychology is very important because goats are way more complex than we thought they were. They can process our facial expressions. We're used to think about livestock as some kind of dumb animal, but they're not. They're showing us they're way more complex than we thought they were.
Also, we salute the researchers at the University of Cape Town who found a very clever way to make bricks using human urine as a key component. It's a constantly renewable resource and the process produces a lot less carbon dioxide than conventional brickmaking. And who can forget the butter-fingered British couple who got engaged in New York, then managed to drop the ring down a drain in Times Square. Security camera footage showed John and Daniela trying in vain to retrieve it. But New York's finest rose to the challenge, managing to rescue the jewellery, clean it and then track down its owners through an appeal on social media. Some officers from the NYPD explained what happened when they got the call.
We took a ride over and we opened up the sewer grate to attempt to recover the ring. Due to the lighting conditions, unfortunately, we weren't able to find it after spending about an hour in the sewer.
So basically at the change of shift, about 9 a.m. or so, figured maybe with daylight we'd have some better luck finding the ring down there. There was a lot of muck and a lot of just typical stuff that you would find at the bottom of a sewer grate down there. But fortunately, it was actually kind of sitting up on top.
In this unit especially, we do all sorts of things. So, I mean, every day for us is always different. We wish them the best and a happy marriage.
Well done, the NYPD. And thanks, Charlotte. Another medical story now, and one about the power of altruism and advertising. It begins with Robert Leibowitz, a 60-year-old man from New Jersey who was in need of a kidney donation. He had been waiting for a transplant for years and he was worried he was running out of time. So, when he went to Disney World with his family, he wore a T-shirt advertising his need for an O-positive kidney donation and a number to call if anyone could help. Pictures ended up all over social media and, incredibly, it worked. Back in June, BBC OS brought together Robert and the man who donated his kidney, Richie Sully, to tell us how it happened. They spoke to Nuala McGovern and she asked Robert where the idea for the T-shirt came from.
I've been on a kidney waiting list for a deceased donor for about 4 years. And the challenge is that waiting for a deceased donor for my blood type, O positive, which I'm universal, I can give to everybody, but I can only get an O, is a 7 to 10 year waiting list. And the problem is some people on dialysis don't even make it 7 years. So the live donor, factory wasn't really working for me. But, I never got down. I have my 5 kids. They're the ones that motivate me. They're the ones that keep me going. And they said, Dad, keep going. You're going to get a kidney and be positive. So we were going to Disney, and I said, listen, out of desperation, I need to come up with an idea. Maybe it's my advertising background, but I came up with the idea of the shirt that said, in need of a kidney, O positive, and then I had my cell phone number on it, on the front and the back. And if I can get one person who is maybe a potential match to be tested, it's one more than I had. And when you're in desperation mode, that one person could be a godsend.
We're calling you on a number that Richie did as well, I suppose, at some point. Richie, how did you come across Robert's story?
I was sitting in a chair at the American Red Cross giving blood, and a friend of mine that was down in Houston was scanning Facebook for a good story. They were right in the middle of Hurricane Harvey. And she came across that and she sent it to me and she said, you are an O positive. He's an O positive. You should give him a call. So when I finished up at the Red Cross, I went home and I gave him a call. In a million years, I never expected to hear back, let alone actually match and end up giving him my kidney.
So it became a match. Let me go back to you, Robert. When you got that call.
I'm surprised you didn't hear me scream in your country.
Maybe I did.
It was a process, and it's important to know that just because you're an O blood match doesn't mean you're going to be the kidney match. So I had about 3 people before Richie who were denied for a variety of reasons. But even when I told Richie, when I spoke to him, I don't know why, and I don't know if it's, I'm being a Monday morning quarterback here, but I felt a positivity. He was so proactive. He was just always so positive. It's like, Rob, I'm going to give you my kidney. I'm going to do everything I can in his, power.
And Richie, what motivated you to offer your kidney to a complete stranger?
It sounds weird, but to me, it's just not a big deal. Like, if my neighbor needed to borrow a tool, I would say, yeah, absolutely, have at it. I see this guy at Disney with his kids, and he's so desperate that he wears a shirt asking for a kidney and has his phone number on it. I would never, ever give my phone number out to random strangers, especially thousands of them, every day. And I just decided, you know what? I have a spare kidney. I can share it with him. We obviously can function just fine with one kidney. Jessica, my friend in Houston that sent me the link, she's a nurse. She loves my daughters, Layla and Emma. There's no way she'd tell me to do this if it were that dangerous or that life-changing for me. I knew that if Rob didn't get donor, he would die.
The remarkable Richie Sully and Robert Leibowitz, who now has one of his kidneys. Now we celebrate the selfless devotion to science of a group of British doctors. You are probably familiar with Lego, the brightly coloured plastic building bricks that get pretty much everywhere, under your feet, behind the sofa, and what many parents dread, inside your child. Jonathan Savage reported on that story for us.
As you know, we're not averse to telling you about a bit of scientific research, especially when the subject matter is of vital importance to humanity. But hold on, mums and dads everywhere worry their heads off when their little one swallows something they shouldn't. The look on my parents' faces when I ingested a drawing pin in Mallorca in 1985 remains for me a moment of great satisfaction. More commonly swallowed, though, is Lego. So 6 London-based doctors have produced a paper, published in the prestigious Journal of Paediatrics and Child Health, no less, on how quickly Lego figurine heads pass through the human system. And they experimented on themselves. With this research being so groundbreaking, they had to create their own metrics. They clearly had some fun doing it. The primary outcome was the Found and Retrieved Time score, shortened to the acronym FART. Haha. while pre-ingestion bowel habit was standardised by the Stool Hardness and Transit Score. I'll let you figure that one out for yourself. Now, try not to think of what the doctors had to do to identify when the Lego head had passed through their system, and try to focus on the good news. The average fart time was 1.7 days, and no humans were harmed in the process.
That was Jonathan Savage. And that is it from us for now. Normal service will be restored with the Global News podcast later. If you would like to comment on this podcast, or you'd just like to tell us about your own favourite stories of 2018, do send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jackie Leonard. From me and my producer Morgan Eyre. If you are celebrating, Merry Christmas. If Christmas isn't your thing, we wish you peace and joy anyway, because frankly, you deserve it. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.